Well, hello everybody. Happy Friday to you. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Edward the Headward Milewski.
Edward the Headward.
Edward, and if in doubt, go east or west? No, Headward.
Not westward.
Not westward.
Edward. So the Fed basically said yesterday.
Day before yesterday.
Sorry. A couple days ago, that you know what they're going to do? They're going to lay off on this interest rate thing. In other words, they've basically signaled they want inflation. Though I think the experiment with the banks in Europe, negative interest rates, has got everybody. In fact, I think this guy Gundlach, he's considered the bond king, and he said if we go to negative rates, we're going to destroy the banking system. So guess what? Rates may be starting to rise because they want inflation.
You're talking about Jeffrey Gundlach.
That's the guy.
Double Line Capital.
That's the guy.
Right.
Jeffrey.
Not
Peter.
That
is not his little younger brother Peter.
Nor David.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So look. So yesterday interest rates got hit. Today they're
Day before
up.
Yesterday.
You know, I'm in a time warp. This one day a week thing is causing problems for me.
Is it?
Well.
You only live one day a week now?
I only come alive at 3 o'clock.
Come alive at 5.
Anyway, I see the 10-year rate's 191 today, 191. If that and this Gundlach gentleman, he thinks if the big resistance is 205, we get over 205. You know, gold's all over the place. Gold was up $15 this morning, and then it soared. It was down 5.
So Gundlach said back in September 14th that he felt there was a 75% chance of a recession occurring before the next presidential election.
I think he's changed that view.
He's changed that view. So how much credibility can we accord him for this new prediction?
Well, he's a billionaire. And he's made his money in the market.
The possession of an esoteric construct like cash does not a genius make, in my view, in my limited alternative reality.
Well, I know.
Not that I'm going to argue with that.
I know. I'm just talking about, you know, you sort of got to be on the right side of things. And I'm not saying he's right. I'm just saying it looks as though the Fed is saying we want inflation. So the way you see it is inflation is you let that U.S. dollar drop and everything else goes up against it.
Right. Which causes the poor to be poorer and the rich to be richer. Those who sell the goods benefit. Those who buy the goods suffer. The poor are always poor.
The rich are always rich. It's the middle class that gets.
Well, the middle class is now poor.
Buggered.
The middle class in America is poor.
Well,
poor.
They're getting poorer because the middle class is shrinking.
Poor middle class. Poor middle class. Anyways, yeah. Well, that's interesting. So then,
and the other thing that they talked about, and sorry to interrupt, but they kept talking about how they're I'll point this out, but they kept talking about how don't expect any decision on trade until the next election. Because
the China trade scenario.
Yeah, because
today Trump announced a big.
I know, but that's how crazy it is. No, yesterday he announced that.
Yeah, yesterday. Did you see the piece I wrote yesterday about him and his reverse course, his 360s on the China trade situation, are actual tradable events?
No kidding.
Yeah.
The market flew when he said that. And gold got sewered.
Exactly. And when he says no, actually fuck China. Gold takes off and the S&P soars. You could trade that fucking
thing. Maybe he's thinking that maybe he's got an account with E-Trade or something.
Bear Stearns. No, but seriously, that was the essence of my article yesterday, was that the Donald Trump has become a tradable signal in his comments on on China trade. And I'm sure there are lots of guys out there who are like, duh, yeah, I'm making money hand over fist. Also, the ECB, the new head of the ECB is Christine Lagarde, who was the head of the International Monetary Fund for many years. She is a French woman of
she's a classy lady. There's no question.
She, in her first press release...
What'd she say?
Her first press conference yesterday said that... No, the day before yesterday, actually, because it was yesterday. Anyway, she said that not only are we going to hold our EU rates at minus 0.5, but we are going to continue to pound out euros at 20 billion euros per month for the foreseeable future. So if printing or if going to zero interest rates if going to negative rates would kill the banking system in the US, what is it going to do to the banking system in Europe?
Well, here's something I heard today.
Whoa, tangent squirrel! Whoa, trying to answer the question.
But you know, like there's a big thing now. They're talking about.
Oh, you noticed?
A big thing.
The big thing
about how the automotive sector in an electric vehicle scenario needs 1/5 the workforce than it does in a carbon. Not carbon, like...
Are you talking about the efficiency of
you need less
mechanical
people,
force?
You need less people to fix it, to maintain. Less parts, everything less. So all the workers in that sector, 80% of them are maybe gone.
In the automotive sector.
Then what are they going to do?
Well, what are you going to do? I think you're going to start shooting people in the street and taking their purses, wallets, caps, and keys and fancy basketball shoes away. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
Anyways, but here's the interesting thing about the whole electric vehicle and the whole lithium-ion battery phenomenon. At this point, there is no efficient methodology for recycling lithium-ion batteries. So the more lithium-ion batteries we create, the more toxic waste we are creating. And if the entire global automotive fleet were to be electrified, the amount of toxic waste that we would be producing would overwhelm landfills on a regular basis by a factor of at least 10. Now, imagine that. It's like next thing you know, you didn't like smokestacks surrounding you, but do you have any objection to piles of spent batteries?
It's sort of tantamount to when they build dams. They say, isn't this great, we've built a dam? But when you mess with the natural waterways of
nature,
it causes all these other problems.
Well, you kill all the land animals that live there.
And then all this soot covers the bottom of that river, and then the creatures they live off of, they can't go in there and get the food.
They're done.
Anyway, you know what? You can't mess with things. Like, you can't tamper too much.
Not nice.
And they're tampering. And just tampering. Electrical is going to do all these things. It's going to do this, and this, but it's going to cause all these other problems.
Well, would you say it's a fair statement that the degree to which humans overpopulate and modify the natural environment, the greater degree that happens, the closer we come to the inflection point at which we start to decline in population in dramatic steps, because all of these systems converge to cause unlivable environments? Like, for example, there's multiple spots in India that are now considered uninhabitable because the temperature never falls below 50 degrees. In the
Fahrenheit
or
Celsius? Just kidding.
Boy, you got me there. I think 50 degrees Celsius is like...
I can tell you exactly what it is.
Here we go, math face.
122.
122 degrees. Not very comfortable. You need some kind of air conditioner to defeat that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Especially trying to imagine air conditioning a city, shopping malls, hospitals with that kind of heat. Untenable, undoable. Not feasible.
I'll tell you the one thesis that I keep thinking that's going to eventually work. Did you notice this week that Copper that was Friday, last Friday?
Copper.
I didn't even notice.
Dr. Copper.
Dr. Copper.
Dr. Copper
was asleep. It looked like as if it was dead. And then they said that the biggest mine in the world may go on strike, and that could be problematic.
Codelco.
The one down in enchilada. I call it enchilada, but it's not enchilada.
Escondido.
Yeah, Escondido.
Yeah.
And copper is now 280 as opposed to 265.
Oh, really?
So 280 on copper, all of a sudden, and you know, for instance, like first quantum was down to I think $9, and now it's 13. Like these things move around. Like I'm looking for volatility. I think I'm looking in the wrong place. Looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yeah, well, at yesterday's close, copper was at 280 still. So when do we get the definitive on when this mine goes on strike or not? That's, that mine threatens to go on strike
every year.
5 times a year. Yeah. Well, but right now in Chile, the entire country is up in arms. I mean, there's a real...
Unusually so.
Well, there's a real class struggle going on there right now.
In just about every country in South America. Like the whole...
Peru is stable at this point. Argentina...
Bolivia's got their issues, always got their issues. Argentina's got some problems. And
Argentina has problems
Venezuela.
Economically, but the Argentinians are so used to being ass-fucked by their government with no lubricant that they don't even bother complaining. Well, they have general strikes so frequently.
They even complain.
That it's,
here comes the government.
That's right again. Spread them. Just make it easier on yourself.
Yeah. Anyway, nice little conversation we're having here. Is this, what would you call this, a confab?
Confabulation? Or
short confab.
Short confabulation or short conferencia. Confab. Anyways, it's almost time. In fact, it is time now for the weekly StoneCastle Asset Management Cannabis Industry Update. And here is the man of the hour, the portfolio manager of the century, Mr. Bruce Campbell. We're joined now by Bruce Campbell, portfolio manager at StoneCastle Investment Management, for the weekly StoneCastle Cannabis Industry Update. Bruce, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me after a couple of weeks of being off, right?
You bet. So big news this week, Canopy Growth gets a new CEO, David Kline, the former Executive Vice President of Marketing and CFO of Constellation Brands, starts on the 20th of January. Mark Zakulin, who's been the interim CEO, steps down officially on, I guess it's the 20th of December. What's your take on that transition?
I mean, it's probably not that surprising given, the noise that Constellation's been making in the past about, not being happy with what's going on with the financials, that they would then put in, somebody who was formerly the CFO into that role. I guess going forward now we won't have, he'll probably need a few quarters to get things done the way he wants them. But then at that point in time, there'll be really no excuses for why, why the performance on the financial standpoint isn't there, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, industry metrics worldwide notwithstanding. Do you think that, what is Constellation going to be able to do that Bruce Linton and Mark Zakulin weren't able to do?
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is you'll see a real more solid focus on cost control and probably generating numbers. Whereas, Bruce's vision all along was that, he was going to grow this thing and really capture real estate and market share, kind of over the next 5 years. That was probably 2 or 3 years ago now that he said that. And then, at that point in time, he'd have such a dominant brand and such a lead over everyone else that, he would just then at that point in time switch gears, and then, the cash flow generation would begin. And, I don't think necessarily that's within the right time frame for most investors these days, especially if they've written a check for $5 billion.
Right. It occurred to me that that Constellation Brands, if they were to exercise any more of their rights to acquire continuing growing incremental ownership in Canopy, that they would have to start to report Canopy's financials blended into their own financials, which is probably not something they want to do at this point, and understandably so. Do you think that there's any sort of buyer's remorse on the part of Constellation Management at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, right? It's one of those things that presuming they went into this with long-term goals and long-term, kind of agenda, and it really hasn't been that long if you sort of think of the grand scheme of things. With the rollout and the way things have transpired in Canada, I got to believe that they're probably a little disappointed by the, sort of short-term numbers. But, longer term, I can't believe that they did this as an investment in Canada. They probably could have done it a lot cheaper and a lot different way if they had been just looking at it from that perspective. Instead, I think they're really looking at this from, how do we build a global brand here? And Canopy has the head start, so let's invest in them, and then we have the option to take them out down the road. So if you were sitting in their chair, I mean, obviously they get pressure just like any other public company does on the quarter, but longer term is what they had to be thinking. That was probably that 3 to 5 years out, and they were also probably thinking about once you saw legalization in the U.S. and in many other jurisdictions, probably including Europe.
Right. Okay, and let's see, other hot news this week. Dollar General has announced that they are going to be selling CBD cosmetics. And I was curious about that announcement because the FDA has really started to, exhibit a lot of pressure against companies placing CBD on the label. And in fact, a lot of the companies have preemptively switched the reference to CBD on labels to just hemp, because hemp is not controversial, whereas the use of the word CBD relative to any claim made is somewhat controversial. How does that affect the cosmetics industry? And obviously, if an entity like Dollar General, Dean, has probably done their homework on what they can and can't say, but is this sort of like a strategic move to be first, or is it just a well thought out strategic initiative that is more of a part of a longer term play for Dollar General?
Yeah, I think it has to do with a bigger global trend. We had actually heard, we've been trying to actually verify this and have been able to, that the Body Shop, that their highest selling product globally is a product that contains CBD. So I'd imagine that Dollar General is probably looking at that and saying, hey, we need to get into this area. If you look at Sephora, the makeup retailer, and look what they've done, they've had great success with CBD products. So, I think as long as they probably don't make specific claims right now, they're okay with the FDA. You obviously want to stay away from those claims. And as you said, there's some companies that are probably switching to the word hemp now, because most consumers recognize, I think, now that CBD is from hemp. There's other CBD that you can generate from other products as well. So, you can actually generate CBD from pine, from what I understand. So, they could actually go out and generate that from other products. But hemp and CBD are pretty well associated, so they can use that. Not completely interchangeable, but I think most consumers understand that that's where it comes from. So that would be my take. And I think they just look at it from a market standpoint and think the size of the market's massive. And so, we kind of want to be involved. And if you think back to April when, the Kardashians had that baby shower where they were giving away CBD gifts, kind of falls right into their marketing realm as well.
You bet. Okay, so along those lines, the Canadian cannabis sales numbers came out this week, and it was interesting that the per capita spend varies so widely province to province, and maybe you could comment on those numbers and what the significance of the huge variance is.
And it comes down to what all the producers have been saying about retail and retail locations. So, if you look at Alberta, they were up there on the per capita basis. I think it was $45 that they were at. And if you look at BC at 10 and Ontario at 15, I think that has a big reason is just the number of retail locations. You also look into those numbers a little further, and they talk about the distance the average person has to go to find a cannabis store. In Ontario, I think it was 34 kilometers, if I remember correctly, which is a long ways. I mean, if you go back to really how retail works, typically in a category like this, it's proximity to where you go to get home. And so, if you look at liquor retailing, that's why we see so many liquor outlets. I think there's 2,200 plus in Ontario alone. And so, it really has the habit forming that, you leave work, you stop at the liquor store and you go home. It'll be the same with cannabis for the most part. I mean, there might be specialty stores that have something special that you go to, but for the most part, it's going to be, where you can get it conveniently. And if you have to drive 34 kilometers, that's a ways, right? That's a 45-minute trip just to go get get cannabis, and depending on what city you're in, it could be even longer. Whereas the black market right now, you could probably still get it delivered to your house or by someone within probably a couple hours, or at the very worst, you can go online to the old black market retailers and arrives in the mail the next day. So that's really the competition, and just really drives the point home that retail still is the issue, and we need to get more retail stores out there.
Right. Interesting. Do you think that the very low number in BC is an indication of a higher patronage of the black market in BC relative to the legal market?
Yeah, I would think that that's the case for sure. Plus, the number of retail locations there still aren't that many retail locations. I was on a speaking tour here a couple weeks ago, and I was in Vancouver and spoke to a number of people, and they were saying, that's the biggest issue that they run into is just proximity and where they can get it.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, the idea that residents of BC don't smoke too much weed relative to the rest of the country is not very, very realistic, having lived in BC for 30 years practically. Interesting. Okay, well, so, I mean, the Canadian companies are under more pressure than the U.S. MSOs at this point, and you've got no end of U.S. analysts promoting the idea that U.S. MSOs are, in fact, a buy right now, whereas Canadian incumbents might be a little bit behind the eight ball. So we're starting to see a lot of the Canadians try to flesh out their future with international deals. And I think that Valens Growworks recently, or I think it was today, announced a partnership that sort of supports that premise.
Yeah, exactly. So they previously had done this deal with Terrakino out of Washington for their source technology, which is a water soluble, tasteless, odorless technology that they have for beverages, and Valens had got that technology and did their deal for Canada, and now they just signed an extension to that to be North America, or sorry, not North America, the rest of the world, and so you'll see. Europe and a few other jurisdictions. And so you'll really see that they're looking at that thinking, okay, we're going to sell product beyond Canada and beyond the borders. So interesting that Valens is making that move, and also that Terrakino was willing to partner up with them again. You bet.
So you mentioned earlier that the technicals in the industry, across the cannabis industry, are improving, and maybe you could illuminate that idea for us a little bit.
Yeah, so we watch a lot of different technical indicators in our office, and a couple of the ones that we've noticed that recently are changing are for Canopy. And so, if you sort of look at one of the tools that we use is called a relative rotation graph, and it looks like the change of momentum, and the change of momentum has recently started to improve with Canopy. You've seen that transpire a little bit from the stock price. It's off its bottom by probably 20% or more here now. You've also started to see some of the traditional momentum indicators. So the one that we look at is a weekly MACD, which is a moving average tool, and it's recently changed back to positive after being negative since basically April. So it looks like we're starting to see a bit of a change in the tide here. I suspect that once we get through tax law selling, probably later next week, most people probably don't wait right until the 27th to do that, that you should start to see, probably some of the lid that's been on some of these stocks start to be removed. And then, obviously if there was any type of catalyst, and we never know what those are, but if there was any type of catalyst, that would obviously, be right for the sector to have a fairly quick move here.
You bet. All right, Bruce, that's a great update as per usual. We're going to leave it there for now and come back to you next week. Thanks very much for your contribution as usual.
Okay, thanks a lot.
So that's interesting. Canopy Growth has got a new CEO starting on January 20th, and the interim CEO, Mark Zakulin, who's also co-founder, is leaving on December 20th or something. I might have those dates slightly wrong, but they're not even going to pass each other in the lobby.
Yeah.
But again, Christmas does present a great time to switch captains, as it were, if you're going through a narrow canal full of sharks and alligators, which the cannabis industry certainly has become a metaphorical representative of, I think. Would you say? What?
Yeah, well, with Canopy Growth, I think this new CEO that's coming in, I think he's a tough customer, and I think they've been sort of said, they're bringing this guy in to make sure that they're going to stay in the game for a long time. They're going do what they have to do to sort of couch their cash position and make sure that it stays around for a long time. And the stock, in the last, ever since they made that announcement, the stock's up several dollars, and it's well up. It's up 30, 40% from where it was at the bottom when we were talking about how oversold it was.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, Bruce did make a good point there that the technicals are starting to indicate a reversal is either underway or not far off.
Yeah.
And certainly fundamentally, we are definitely nearing the end of any tax loss pressure. Tax loss selling pressure.
Remember how last year the tax loss selling was on? It never happens the same way twice, does it?
No, never.
Okay.
As well, actually, here's the thing that I've noticed. This is just an anecdotal, empirical observation, but it seems to be in years where there's a full-on blasting market, the tax loss selling only happens at the end of the year in the last 2 weeks, and its effect on the market overall is muted. In years where there's, characterized by a significant correction across the entire market or one major portion thereof, then the tax loss selling seems to just be a vague background pressure that continues relentlessly through the last quarter, and by the end of the second week of December has pretty much exhausted itself. And that's where you can look for fresh buying to start to come in as guys start to position themselves for the January sort of investment bounce that characterizes the New Year's after long, prolonged corrections. Would you concur with that, Ed?
Yeah, you know what? But it always, history may rhyme, but not necessarily
repeat itself. My rhyme. Is that like in 1963 lines with 1973?
Rhymes.
Yeah,
well, like remember how the selling was overwhelming? Well, we had a terrible December last year in all the markets.
We did.
It was brutal. This year,
Coming up now, we have our one and only top chart guy, Dan Mcdermott from thechartguys.com. Charting man Dan Mcdermott joins me now from thechartguys.com. Dan, welcome.
Thanks, James. Glad to be back.
You bet. So this week must have put a smile on your face with all the action in the markets?
It's been good. We went from a period where the bears had it easy for months and months, and now we're in an area where it's not easy street for the bulls necessarily, but there's opportunity in both directions, and this week has given some good bullish opportunities and good bearish opportunities.
Yeah, I published a piece yesterday, or it was yesterday, suggesting that Donald Trump's unpredictable behavior has become a predictable trading signal as it pertains to China and the China trade war and tariffs and all that. And sure enough, that later that day he comes out and says, okay, we're doing a deal with China, and boom, S&P takes off, but gold did not do what I expected it to do, which was to deteriorate. So how much of a factor is Donald Trump becoming in catalyzing market directions?
Oh, huge. And he knows what he's doing, and he knows the power that he has to do it. So it's the kind of thing where, again, we have so many people, rightfully so, saying, I don't really trust this market. The market's being manipulated. But at the same point, you can't be betting against big money that is manipulating the price in a certain direction and trying to fight that. So if you don't trust the move, that's fine, but don't be betting against the move. So Trump did have that, tweet yesterday that rocketed the market to all-time highs. And now that we're having some confirmation from the Chinese side that, yes, we do have a phased deal worked out, there's still a little bit of discrepancy as far as, are we going to see the agricultural promise from China? And we're seeing a little bit of a sell the news reaction today in the markets, but big picture, the bulls are still in full control. And to your point about gold, it has been notable to me as well that both gold and bull miners consistently have been buying the dips that result from bearish reactions to these headlines.
Sure. Do you think that the Christine Lagarde took over the European Central Bank, and her first statement was that they're going to keep printing 20 billion euros worth of funny money and keep the interest rates at negative 0.5? Do you think that has a sort of warming effect on gold?
It could. To be honest, for me, I've been watching the correlation significantly with the S&P 500 and gold and the dollar, of course. And the dollar has been seeing some cracks in its armor. The bulls have been in control for 2 years of the dollar. So I'm watching the dollar, the market, and gold. And at this point in time, it is shaping up to me that we need to see market weakness for gold bulls to really get back in full control to where they were just 3 months ago. So for me, the market right now is the most important factor, and we're going to have to see some losses of daily uptrends in order for these gold bulls to regain their momentum. At this point, they're just playing defense.
Sure. So at what point do you think that, I mean, I'm asking you a fundamental question of a technical guy, but I'm sure you can't ignore fundamentals totally in so much as they become technical sort of signals. But at what point do you think that the global deficit in minerals sort of catalyzes a new bull market in mining companies?
Honestly, I don't try and ever time any kind of macroeconomic anything. So, like I said, you have all these people that are saying the market is manipulated, and we have all this Fed money being printed, and we have the repo market getting out of control. But the bigger picture is we can stay, I mean, the saying is we can stay irrational longer than you as a trader can stay solvent. So if we are looking at, a mineral deficit, as you suggest, I have no idea if that would come into play in 1 month or in 6 years. So I just use the charts one day at a time to patiently watch for the signals.
Sure. Okay, we're seeing a lot of strength in the technicals of some of the larger cannabis companies, certainly with Canopy Growth on the Canadian side, obviously in the larger US MSOs that have reported more optimistic revenue growth. Do you think that the bottom is in for the bull market? Do you see any sign of that in your view of the technical indicators?
We are starting to see signs that are showing us that. Today was a big day for some resistance breaks. Afria broke its key level yesterday and got some decent follow through this morning. Canopy broke it today. So that's just putting some pressure on shorts. That's telling shorts that it's not going to be really easy as it has been. And for me, it will always be weekly trend changes, which we'll look at on the chart here in just a second. Weekly trend changes for me are the clear sentiment shifters. And that was the case for CGC back in 2017. Around the $7 mark, we changed the weekly trend, and then the bull run began. Bitcoin changed its weekly trend around the $4,000 range, and then it ran to $13,000. So it will be the weekly chart that has me say yes for sure, but we are seeing it on the daily time frame. The shift is underway, and it is looking like everybody was looking towards tax loss season, and we're now running out of days left in the year. So it is looking like the odds of a bottom being set for now. In addition to the volume climax from when we did see that V-shaped bounce on CGC a couple weeks ago, it is looking like the bottom is set for now.
You bet. All right, Dan, let's take a look at some of your charts now and see what the technicals are telling us.
So we have a bunch of charts to look at here. We'll start it off with gold, and this is the monthly time frame for gold. We saw the big breakout that certainly got a lot of people's attention back on precious metals. This right now is very healthy monthly consolidation, and it's entirely possible that this is a bull flag leading to higher highs in the coming months. We can see back here, it's fairly similar. 3 months of consolidation, an inside bar, and then an increase in bull volume and big breakout from higher highs. I wouldn't expect that same kind of breakout because the one that did take place here was a 2-year tightening pattern breaking bullish, but I am certainly watching for a higher high. And again, it's impressive. Gold can certainly go up when the market is going up. It just goes up easier when the market is seeing some weakness. So it is fairly impressive that gold has only consolidated this much with the market running to blue sky breakout. And I do believe that the dollar losing its strength is going to be the more newsworthy story related to gold. Here's the dollar on the daily time frame, and you can see we've been pulling back fairly significantly, and we're at the lowest prices we've seen on the dollar. Now on the weekly chart, we have dropped down to the lowest prices seen in a few months. So if this weakness can continue, it's a good sign for gold and miners. And again, today is another day where if we look at bull miners, this is NUGT, the leveraged bull ETF, we can see dip buying on bearish reactions. So I have been impressed with the dip buying from bull miners, and I certainly have my attention on gold and bull miners into the start of 2020. looking at the S&P 500. So here's SPY, and this is what Trump's tweets can do. Trump tweeted first thing yesterday morning for a massive breakout, and then again pre-market. Today, he was doing it again, and you can see this is the volatility as a result and the China headlines, and now it's a little bit of a sell the news reaction, but the bottom line is we continue to hit all-time highs, we continue to remain in a daily uptrend, and for me, the guide has been the weekly higher low pattern, which has kept me bullish, the S&P 500, through all of these brief consolidation periods that we've seen through 2018. So I will remain a market bull as long as the weekly uptrend remains, and that weekly time frame is so important to me. Same for the marijuana sector. So CGC, we have broken key resistance today. We had 2168 as almost a triple top here. We pulled back from it. Today we have broken it. A little bit of profit taking today. No major red flags at this point. But what I am looking for and what I will need is the weekly trend change to really be confident in the bulls again. And what I consider is this move on the weekly time frame is still coming off of the low. I need a clear pivot for a weekly higher low to form, and then that higher high for that weekly trend change to take place, which will be the first time since we started pulling back from $52. And again, just looking at previous examples, the one that I mentioned was 2017, and I can remember sending an email to friends and family who were interested in the sector, and I was comfortable telling them to be looking for entries in positions when this little weekly, and it's hard to see here with these candles, but this little weekly higher low and higher high is what made me confident that the sector momentum had shifted. And that obviously went very well. We had a very different fundamental lead up into that, but weekly trend changes are what will be needed. APHA has consistently been showing us that it is the strongest major Canadian MJ name with CGC. It got its bull break of 518 yesterday, followed through today. Again, same thing, the weekly time frame. This move is coming off of the low, and I will need to see a top out, a clear pullback for a weekly higher low, and then continuation for the weekly trend change to take place. We got close to a weekly trend change here. We had the low, high, higher low, failed to see the higher high breaking resistance. Bears took back over and patiently waiting for weekly trend changes for bulls to say, that was a brutal 2018. Let's move onward and upward into 2020. And certainly we will be paying close attention to the fall of 2020 heading into the election, knowing that a whole bunch of individual states will be looking to legalize in the US. And even if we don't have a Democrat with the potential to see federal legalization, that would be a huge bonus if there was a MJ-friendly Democrat in the running heading into September, October, November of 2020. Even without that, we will see catalysts from states like Florida looking to legalize individually.
All right, Dan, thanks very much for joining us today. Your contribution is appreciated as usual. We'll see you next week.
See you then, James. Thanks.
All right, so that was Dan Mcdermott from thechartguys.com. If you haven't checked out his course offerings at thechartguys.com, you're just plain dumb, because they are pretty much the best and fastest technical training and most easy to understand, so much so that even I got through one episode. No, I'm just kidding. I am still relentlessly trying to understand technical analysis, and having Ed here explaining it to me is a big help. But man, Charting Man Dan's courses are very simple and easy to understand. Now, Edward, let me ask you.
Okay.
What do you know about Regulation A+?
Nothing.
Nothing? Do you know what Regulation A+ is?
No.
Do you know what it refers to?
I think it's crowdfunding.
Crowdfunding. Yeah. Well, crowdfunding is an element of Reg A+ capital raising.
When you say reggae, is that like reggae music?
Reggae Plus, man! We're going to party with Reggae Plus people. The people is going to revolutionize the market, man, once and for all. It's going to level the playing field for the average investor, man.
So is that like reggae plus and raising money?
So Reggae Plus is an exemption under the 1933 Securities Act. It's actually been around since the 30s, and there's been like one a year, apparently, according to our next guest, who is the undisputed expert in Reg A+ financings for entrepreneurs and issuers who want to raise money via Reg A+. Coming to us live now, all the way from Alexandria, Virginia, Sarah Hanks. My guest now is Sarah Hanks. She's the CEO of CrowdCheck, Inc. Sarah, welcome.
you. Happy to be here.
Sarah, CrowdCheck Inc. is in what business exactly?
We're in the business of providing a complete range of legal, due diligence, compliance services to any companies who are raising capital online. So anything from can we say this? How do we say this? How do we comply with the disclosure requirements of the SEC? Whether it's a Regulation D offering, whether it's Regulation A, or whether it's Regulation CF, we can help out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're an attorney.
Essentially, yes, a recovering attorney.
Right, a recovering attorney. Great. Okay, so I'm most interested in talking to you about Regulation A+, which is a platform that is generating quite a bit of buzz in the capital markets here in Canada because it has so many features to it that, from my perspective, disintermediate the value subtract layer of the capital markets ecosystem. So tell me about Reg A+. How did it come about and what is the intent?
Well, actually, it's Reg A has been around for ages, since 1938. It was a way of companies being able to offer securities directly to retail investors, any investors, without having to go through the full SEC registration process. But the thing was, because you had to comply not just with the SEC's requirements, but also the requirements of every state into which you were selling, it was incredibly expensive and it was hardly being used. So up till 2015, there was maybe one offering a month, if that, hardly even that. And then in 2015, the SEC revised the exemption so as providing that you offered under so-called Tier 2 of Regulation A, which includes ongoing reporting requirements so that investors stay up to date with what the company is doing. Providing you comply with that, you can raise funds only through going through the SEC and not having to go through every single state. And so it's being used by a number of small companies to raise funds up to $50 million.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the interesting attributes of Reg A Plus to me are that there is no requirement to become publicly traded. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, companies can either use Reg A as a stepping stone to go to NASDAQ later if they choose, but if they like, they can just stay in the Regulation A regime forever as long as they please. And they're still essentially private companies, but they're raising money publicly.
Wow, fantastic. So how do investors in an issuer that is committed to staying private, how do they exit their investment?
That's a really good question, and it's one that's evolving at the moment. There are several platforms that are standing up to provide liquidity. To the extent you find somebody who wants to buy your securities, you can go to your next door neighbor and say, hey, I invested in this company. Would you like to buy the shares? That's absolutely legal, but it's not very efficient. So there are some platforms that are standing up with the intention of providing liquidity. Or if you want to go a little bit more complicated, the company could always get quoted on the OTC markets, which a handful of Reg A companies have done that so far. But as I say, it's completely an evolving industry.
Sure. So I've seen some Reg A Plus offerings where the company does successive Reg A Plus offerings, and each time they do a Reg A Plus offering, they raise the value per share that they're selling the offering at, thereby creating a structured value enhancement exercise for all of the investors in every step of the way. And they do this without doing anything except making the opportunity available and advertising to an ever new contingent of investor targets to come in and replace the investors who have made money and now want to leave. So to me, the most exciting thing about it is that the issuer can advertise directly to non-accredited investors and accept investment from them and structure a value enhancement process that guarantees and that's a word that you never are allowed to say in capital markets, that guarantees an increase in the value of the shares over time.
It's a really interesting phenomenon, actually, because the very important thing to notice from the point of view of the investor is it is not yet the market who's setting that valuation. It still is the company, but the company is doing so and has to describe why it's doing so. We are setting the new price because we have reached our MVP, or we're setting the new price because our volumes of sales have increased, that sort of thing. So it's not the market who's setting it yet. As I say, it's evolving, it's early days. But it is something that several companies have been doing. We can, and to go back to what you just said, because you can never say guarantee ever in the private markets. So prices can go down as well as up. We haven't seen that yet happen, but that could happen. You are not guaranteed that your shares are worth a particular price.
Sure. How many Reg A Plus offerings, since the rule came into, the robust version of it came into effect in 2015, how many Reg A Plus offerings have been attempted, and how many have succeeded versus how many have failed? I wish I had my spreadsheet in front of me. I think it's around about 500 to 600, and I don't have an exact percentage for you of how many have succeeded, because of course you've got to define what success means. If you're looking at how many companies have actually raised funds, though it might not be the full amount that they were looking for. It's a significant number of them, although there are a large number of companies who have not raised. I mean, the market spoke. This is the great thing. If you can't attract retail investors, if you can't convince somebody that this is worth investing in, then your offering is not going to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the great things, as you mentioned, the disintermediation. Companies are speaking directly to investors, and if they can't get the investors' attention, they're not going to succeed. Right. Okay, so when an issuer applies for qualification as a Reg A Plus issuer, they have to disclose the total amount of funds that they are targeting in this Reg A Plus offering. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, what companies tend to do these days is just say, hey, we're raising up to $50 million. Sure. The market does not seem to be imposing a penalty for companies who clearly will never get to the $50 million. I think the market understands we're looking for 50. If we only get 5, we'll spend it on this particular set of use of proceeds. And that's something that investors have to watch out for, is look at the use of proceeds and make sure that you agree that if the company is if they only raise $5 million, can they do something useful with it? Investors should certainly read the offering circular in that respect.
Sure. And do the issuers have to report how much they raised on the close of the offering?
Not exactly on the close, but in the ongoing reporting that's required with the SEC. They have to file a Form 1SA and a 1K. The SA is filed semi-annual, and the K is the annual. And in that, the financial statements will have to disclose exactly what was sold.
I see. Very interesting. Now, the other interesting component to me is that the existing shareholders in the company are able to sell their shares in a Reg A Plus offering, as long as that disclosure is in the Reg A Plus offering, that what ultimately constitutes a use of proceeds of some of the offering is going to be used to help other shareholders, previous investors, exit at a profit.
That's right. Well, you hope it's at a profit. It's going to depend what they invested at.
Right.
But the selling shareholders for the first year, no more than 1/3 of the amount sold can go to the previous shareholders. After the first year, it's a purely numerical limit. You can't sell more than $15 million a year. But if the company is selling on behalf of selling shareholders, you do have to do a couple of things. One, you have to disclose who is selling. So you know whether it's somebody who is an early investor. You may have some idea of what they bought at. And you will also have to be very clear about the fact that any of the funds sold for selling shareholders is not going to the company. It's going straight into the pockets of the investor.
Right. Okay. And so in the private realm then, the issuer is allowed to declare a trading day or multiple trading days at their discretion and provide a platform for new investors to buy shares from old investors on the company's website. And with all of the features of anti-money laundering and know your client built into the process. Is that the case?
You can do that. There are some very old no-action letters dating back to the 1990s that permit the company to set up a so-called bulletin board. But the company has to be very, very careful that it's not triggering any of the broker-dealer registration requirements. So there is all they can do is say, here's a seller, here's a buyer, do whatever you like between yourselves. They can't act as an intermediary. They can't provide documentation. So it's a very limited role that they can play on behalf of their own securities.
Sure. Sarah, if people want to engage your firm to explore Reg A Plus opportunities, how do they get a hold of you?
It's very easy. It's just Sarah, no H, at CrowdCheck.com.
Perfect. Sarah, we're going to leave it there for now. That's a great introduction to your company, and you know I'll be talking to you again soon.
All right, thank you very much.
So now, what do you think about Reg A Plus?
You know what I think? I think it's an idea whose time has come.
Very well said, Edward. What do you know about hockey? Do you follow hockey? You watch hockey? Do you play hockey? Are you a goalie? Center field?
Center field?
Center field.
Yeah. You're out if you're talking about hockey and center field, I think you're in center field.
Coming to us today live from Scottsdale, Arizona, the one, the only, Paul Bissonnette. All right, I'm joined now by Paul Bissonnette, Canibrands sports media ambassador and investor. Paul, welcome. So tell me about when you were playing hockey in the NHL. Were you able to legally, without getting anybody's shirt in a knot, were you able to use CBD to treat injuries and fatigue and all those things that CBD is awesome for?
I never found out about CBD until my career was over, unfortunately. I didn't even smoke much cannabis when I played, just, because of maybe because of the stigma, and I just hadn't done it much then, whereas when I retired is when I really got into the CBD and cannabis use. And it's really unfortunate because, I like to have a good time when I played, and, I drank quite a bit because, a lot of the partiers did. And if I would have been introduced to cannabis, I probably would have laid off the alcohol more and been doing a lot less harm to my body.
Right on. So is it legal at this point for players in the NHL to consume cannabis? Is it an accepted remedy?
I mean, I don't think they care if you do. I don't know. I don't really know exactly how the testing goes. I think it's just one of those things where if you do it, it's okay, and they don't see it as a performance-enhancing substance. As far as the CBD use, I know plenty of guys who are using Canibrands, and a lot of them message me for it. I have our guys send it to them direct. Whereas, I mean, I don't really see a problem with the CBD factor of it, and since all these guys are using it, I would imagine that they wouldn't test positive for any performance enhancer, considering so many of these guys are in fact doing it. Right. And I know.
Huh. Okay, so how did you get involved with Canibrands?
Well, Brad Morris, one of the founders of it, put me in touch with Chris and Kenny Lord, and they mentioned that they were going to do this and get into this space. And I think the connection was that Brad's father, Pat's a hockey agent for Newport Sports. That was my agency. He goes, listen, this guy has one of the largest hockey podcasts in the world. He's got, over 1.5 million people following him on his social media platforms. And he's talking about, smoking weed and CBD on his podcast. We need to make this guy the ambassador for us on I guess, the sports side of things, where I wouldn't necessarily, I just fall on the sports side of things. Like I think I have a pretty big reach. And since I'm so passionate about cannabis and CBD, now mind you, Canibrands is not a cannabis play. It's strictly CBD. It was a no-brainer to get involved with them. And especially considering after I'd used the product and even do due diligence by asking people like, hey, like I'm not crazy, right? This is actually as good as I think it is. And it was after that, it was like, let's jump on board and let's take this thing to the moon.
Sure. I haven't had the chance to try a Canimed product yet. Is it only available in the United States at this point?
It is, but January 1st, it's going to be open to Canada as well. I'm actually really excited for that because I would say maybe even a little bit more, half my demographic, so half the people listen to my podcast and all my social following, they're all in Canada. So they're like, hey, when can we get this stuff? We hear how unbelievable it is. Like, we want to try it. And finally, they're going to be able to starting in January. So I was really excited. I know with all the rules and all the border crossing stuff when it comes to cannabis and CBD products, it can be a little wonky, but we figured it out. And I'm excited for my Canadian following to get to experience this stuff.
Great. Well, I'm excited for January now, too.
Are you asking for a care package? Is this a little hint at me or what?
Please, yeah. And how better to get people talking about it than to give it away? I use CBD every day. I take a 50 milligram dose, or a 42 milligram dose actually, every morning after breakfast, because it just levels me out for the day. It gives me just a background focus that I can no longer live without. Not that I'm addicted, because I do go long phases without it. When I travel to the US or somewhere, sometimes I forget to buy it, and it's like, I'm like, oh, why am I so scattered today? Oh yeah, I haven't done my CBD from like 3 days, but so I use it every day. I'm really excited to try this.
If I pop in right there, you mentioned that anxiety aspect, or well, you didn't say that. You said it levels you out.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So for me, I get a little anxiety. Like sometimes my mind gets racing, and I feel if I take it in the morning, like as you mentioned, it levels you off with, if you don't have cannabis at hand, it helps it. And for those of you who don't want to use cannabis and just CBD, it helps with that. So, and you don't get the high. So it helps with that. How do you ingest it? That was a question I had for you.
Well, so my particular product is in MCT oil, so I do a 1 milliliter drop just in my mouth.
Okay, so we have drops right now. We're also looking at getting the capsules, so it becomes easier to use for some people, easier to travel with. We have sprays now. Okay. And it's just a small little tube. So, let's say maybe your wife could carry it in her purse, or if she uses it, even if she has a little clutch, so you feel like you don't have to carry this thing around. It's not even that big. Couple pumps. I mean, we have it in the sleep. We have that in the boost as well. And then we also have the tinctures, but we're looking for other ways in order to grow the product so people can take CBD in, like whether it be patches at nighttime on your lower back if it's bugging you. So we're looking to expand in that regard as well.
Cool. And so how many products does Canibrands actually have right now?
I think we have 4 to 5. The ones I use religiously are Canimend, which is, for muscles and aches and pains, which if you work out a lot and you're an athlete, a lot of these hockey players are asking me for this. We have it in cream form and balm form. I like the balm personally. The cream sells better, but hey, once again, it's just preference. So that's why we wanted to give people the option. The Can I Sleep is like, I use it religiously. My sleep is so important. I mentioned how I'm a bit of a scatterbrain and I have all these different things I want to do, and my mind never stops. I have to take it before bed so my mind will just shut off, and next thing you know, I'm asleep and I got my 8 hours, and for me that is extremely important. If I don't have it, I really struggle. I toss and turn, and once again, I ask people, am I crazy or is this stuff in there? And I have people begging me for it. And the other one I use religiously is the Can I Boost, and that's how I take it in the morning, as you mentioned, how you get leveled off from it if you take it in the morning. I also do it later afternoon if it's been a heavy work day, to give me that extra boost so I can actually get my energy in order to get to the gym.
Right on.
There's a couple other ones, the Can I Fresh. And as I said, like every week we might have something pop up on the website, and I don't keep in touch with them that closely.
Okay. Is Canibrands a company that investors can participate in at this point? Are they publicly traded? Are they going to be?
Oh God, you're asking me about the finances situation. We're not publicly traded. I know that yet. I believe we're doing a raise right now. See, I don't even know how much information I'm giving you that I shouldn't be right now.
Okay, we don't have to talk about that.
I'm definitely not the guy to ask about the numbers situation.
Sure. Are there other athletes in the NHL and other pro sports that you're aware of who are big advocates for CBD?
Big time. Excuse me, advocates. I know enough now, and more are popping up. It's actually kind of crazy how many closet CBD users there are in the professional sports world. I mean, let alone hockey. Like, I got all these guys who I send it to and who are asking me about it, and they love it, and they're asking me for more of it. Who I don't think if I asked them to post about it, they would do it. I think they don't want that publicly known, where that's kind of crazy for the amount of guys that are doing it. I don't understand the problem. Like, we're asking so much from these athletes on a daily grind and to put their bodies on the line, and you have a natural product that's going to make them feel better, and there's got to be some like be careful about it. It's like, man, the science has backed it. Everyone's aware it doesn't cause any type of harm. Let's get this thing going. Let's get this in everybody's hands, because there might be guys who aren't using it because they're afraid that if they do, they're going to get busted and they're going to lose. They're going to get a 20-game suspension.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Well, Paul, that's a great introduction to the company, and I really appreciate your time today. So thanks very much for joining me.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. I wish I could have gave you more answers on the financial side of stuff, but Canibrands is an unbelievable product. I'm very happy I'm on board, and no hesitation to put my name behind it.
Cool, man. I'll look forward to trying it in January. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, I'll get you that care package.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. What a champ. Have you been to check out his podcast?
No.
No, you should check it out.
You know, but more and more people, like, remember we had the guy from the New England Patriots. I think there's more and more evidence that people that are in the sports, I mean, it's high, especially like hockey, football, not so much basketball, but, you know, it's easy to get injured.
So now it's time for our weekly esports industry segment, and it's brought to you as usual by our friends at New Wave Esports. In fact, here's CEO Dan Mitri. Dan Mitri joins me now, New Wave Esports CEO, for the New Wave Esports update. Dan, welcome back.
Hey James, how you doing? It's good to see you again. I see you're there in Toronto. I'm coming from, well, it's been a rainy Los Angeles, but it's still much better weather. I can't complain.
Well, the same here in Toronto, unfortunately. So Dan, tell me, what's new in the world of New Wave Esports, or esports generally?
Yeah, so we've made some pretty big moves. As of Monday of last week, we announced a definitive agreement to fully acquire Even Matchup Gaming. And we're very, very excited to fold Even Matchup underneath the New Wave portfolio and add them to the family of companies that we work with.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, pretty badass.
Yeah, excellent. What's the story with Event Matchup? What do they do?
So, Even Matchup Gaming was founded in 2014 by gentleman Joe Krabari. He goes by Toronto Joe. And he's got this incredible community behind him that very much leans into him to experience esports within the fighting game community, or FGC, what we call for short. So they are a Toronto-based leading esports organization that's producing high-quality events and content with top-level athletes. We're talking some of the biggest fighting game athletes are coming out to our events and competing, and that brings a whole bunch of different enthusiasts along, whether they're fans of those athletes or just want to see Super Smash Brothers played at a high caliber. So Even Matchup They are Canada's leader in FGC events. They run 80 events a year with two majors, one called Get On My Level, which is produced every May in Toronto. And then they have a growing presence in the U.S. as they come down to the tri-state area and produce Let's Make Moves, which is just second to Get On My Level. So they're doing incredible, awesome events, and if you've never been to an esports event, I go to a GOML, go to a Let's Make Moves. You'll see some incredible experiences.
Very cool. And so it's in May in the Toronto area.
Yeah. So last year we hosted it at the exhibition place. This year we're going to be at the Maple Leaf Garden. So big turnout.
Wow, that sounds exciting. And so, relative to other esports categories, how big is FGC?
So FGC is I would say a very small niche sliver within the grander esports ecosystem. You've got like the Call of Duties, the Fortnites, the League of Legends, which pull in millions upon hundreds of millions of views and hundreds of millions of esports enthusiasts that are following along. But within the ecosystem, yes, fits FGC is these fighting games. But with this very niche audience is a very hyper-engaged audience. So, last year we were expecting 1,000 people to come out to our event. We saw 2,100 people come out. We saw just under 1 million live stream views on the Get On My Level live stream itself. That means people very much follow along fighting games. Number one, because they're easy to understand. There's two people, and they duke it out. There's really nothing else going on, and it's an easy format to follow. And a lot of times it's that single elimination. Okay, that guy lost, so now he doesn't go on. He goes to the loser's bracket. So it's much easier to digest that content and be entertained by it. And so that's where we see a very hyper-engaged audience coming out to our events, watching our live streams, which in turn makes sponsors happy because they want to get in front of those eyeballs. You bet. So is it safe to say that the Even Matchup Gaming acquisition is sort of a case study of how New Wave Esports is going to build shareholder value over time through the expansion of your portfolio through acquisition? I think that's a great summary. Yeah. So, up to this point, our portfolio has mainly been comprised of minority investment or minority stake investments, more of the traditional holdings co. And that served as a great foundation to bring our portfolio live to the CSE. So now as we go forward, you'll see over the next 6 to 12 months, a hard right turn to full acquisitions. And that's where it's important for us to, number one, build these companies. We are passionate about esports, and we want to see esports thrive. So now we have the capital, the money to acquire these companies, bring in the operation expenses, optimize those, and multiply their revenues year over year. So a company like Even Matchup Gaming and all the other companies going forward are very integral to the health of our portfolio, but also the industry. Specifically with Even Matchup, they are scalable and they're rapidly growing. So that tells me, a minimal investment in operation expenses in order to grow more into a North American audience and then expand live stream to a global audience. So each one of their events has been setting record level attendance. They attract hyper engaged audiences that sponsors want to get in front of. And honestly, this acquisition really represents a major milestone in our commitment to fully acquire esports companies and products. And it demonstrates our expertise in identifying acquisition opportunities at fair market value. So there's a lot of different perks to why we made this decision and why we'll make those decisions to acquire very specific companies going forward. Sure. So using the fighting game community as an example, you mentioned that it's a very niche sort of component to the whole esports universe, yet nonetheless, you've got millions of people visiting and 80 tournaments each year. So is this like a niche that could explode into like a mainstream thing, or is it more like it's a niche, but in the esports world, niche still means millions of eyeballs? Both, right? So niche still does mean millions of eyeballs. Look at Evo. Evo is, in my consideration, I think it's undoubtedly the biggest fighting game tournament in the world. And that attracts, thousands of people coming out and, again, millions of views on live stream. So people still want to watch esports. And no matter what their passion is, they're going to go seek it and they're going to find it. And so, yes, even though this is niche, still the gaming audience is a 2.5 billion gamer worldwide affair. And within that sits esports. And then within that sits fighting game communities. So this is something that's rapidly growing. We see an audience base within just even Matchup of about 7,400 engaged audience members who come out to our events year over year. And that's continuing to grow. And so as we go into 2020, we're working closely with Even Matchup to show what that projected revenue looks like. What is the product timeline? Where are we going to expand further? And then obviously make that publicly available, but also really start driving events and getting people charged up. How do we connect with their communities at a local level that gives them the inspiration to either compete or come out to additional events in the future and really build a experience, build a community behind us. So what Joe has done to this date since 2014 is the fruits of his labor is actually coming to fruition. And there's people coming out that want to engage and watch Super Smash Brothers. They want to watch Street Fighter V and Tekken 7 played at the most highest caliber available out there. And you have incredible sponsors that are coming in that want to be latched to that high quality production and get in front of these eyes. So as you see in 2020, we're going to start really kind of getting underneath the hood and pulling back the veil where we can and publicly disclosing, hey, here's the explosive growth. Here's where we're monetizing. Here's where the community is walking away with incredible experiences.
Wow, sounds fascinating. Where do you see the biggest sort of market opportunity in new wave or in esports generally in 2020?
Well, what we're seeing here, and it's kind of highly reflective, but I'll first start is where we don't necessarily want to go. You had, Mark Cuban that recently just stated that if you invest in teams, it's going to be a hard investment. And the reason, and I tend to agree with that because, yeah, they're pulling some great top line revenues, but profitability is pretty low, anywhere from 1% to 4% profit margins, because a lot of the expenses go to team salaries, running training houses, to all this, your standard overhead. And it's hard for teams to stay afloat and continue being green businesses, where yes, we still invest in those because we invest in the ecosystem. It's important to have athletes and actual teams competing at high calibers, but we're seeing much more profitability in the tournament operator side. So this coming out of the gate as our first acquisition is our commitment to that. And what you're going to see as we publicly disclose our financials over the next several quarters is obviously, hopefully, a growth in the event operator side, and those revenues starting to multiply and the profitability starting to increase. We see it now, and so with us as our expertise of coming in to optimize these businesses and tapping into our network, we're certainly going to help that growth.
You bet. All right, Daniel, we're going to leave it there for now. We'll come back to you soon. Thanks very much for the update. That was the New Wave Esports update. Hey everybody, so there's your esports segment for the week, and we'll be back next week with a whole bunch of great content. Ed Milewski's going to be here to beat you around the head and ears.
We're gonna find some trading ideas for you.
We're going to rip it up over here. It's Christmas party week next week, so all the elves will be here, and we'll be making presents. We'll be finding out who's naughty and nice, and giving them a little bit of rice.
And getting it twice.